All right, what's up, guys? We're back with the podcast. It's not a podcast, so we're just gonna shoot the shit again this week. There was some stuff that we didn't talk about last week, so we're gonna get to all that. But just as a short reintroduction, my name's Max LePage. I'm a physical therapist at Precision Performance Physical Therapy in the Philly area in Pennsylvania, and I'm talking with my good friends Logan and Chad, who are the co-owners of TriFit Barbell down in South Carolina, both very well-seasoned strength coaches. And you guys do a lot more than just strength coaching at this point. So seasoned fitness professionals and arbiters of quality information and guidance
Oh, I
for
like
our
that.
profession.
Yeah, I do
I
too.
like that, dude. Arbiters
There you go.
of quality information.
That's the goal, at least, for all of us. But
Actually, touching on that, Max, there was one thing back when we were all personal trainers together that you said that has stuck with me. And it was like, what is the job of a personal trainer? Because we were one-on-one trainers back then, right?
Mm-hmm.
You said the delineation of proper information to our clients. I was like,
Interesting.
it's brilliant. You think about what we're supposed to do, right? And it's just like, we're not the researchers, we're not the scientists. It's like we are the medium with which we can kind of filter out the good from the bad and pass along. So being an arbiter is, it's something we have a duty to make sure that we
that sounds like we have way more power than what we do.
Dude, I mean, it's like, we're just like stroking the ego here, right?
Yeah,
well,
for sure.
On one, like when you think about, okay, I'm going to be the arbiter or like the gatekeeper between the science that is developing, right? The researchers doing the research. And then there's the general public who, for context, like you say, I feel like we have more power than we should. Well, the reality is, like, how many billions of dollars get spent on chronic diseases, obesity, chronic pain, all of these things that can be so massively influenced by exercise, getting fitter, getting stronger. And so I feel like there is more power there than I think that lots of folks even realize. And the researchers aren't the ones disseminating that information. So it's like, you guys are on the front lines of combating so many different chronic diseases, chronic ailments, chronic pain. And so I feel like there is a lot of power there. And I'm surprised that I came up with something so wise when I was
wise beyond your years, my friend.
Yeah, exactly. I say kind of a similar thing with physical therapy too. I feel like people have a hard time figuring out, like, what is the job description. I feel like people always want the box to fit it in. And for PT, I'm like, there's no reason to fit yourself into a box of like, oh, I rehab injuries when they come up. I'm like, who on this planet Earth is the person who is going to assist people in getting rid of pain and improving their physical function while not having to cut them open? You, as a physical therapist, are the person who's responsible for doing that in whatever way best suits you. So 30 years ago, it was doing ultrasound and kind of these bullshit modalities that we found out doesn't work. And now we switch gears and we're going more towards strength exercise based, and because that's more well supported by the literature. And so I'm like, it doesn't matter what you think that you do. The only thing that you do is address pain and function in the context of doing it from a non-surgical or non-pharmacological route. And I feel like it's kind of the same thing for you guys. Like, what do? Well, we just get people fitter, stronger, achieving their physical goals. And it doesn't necessarily matter whether we do it with a bar or whatever. We're just going to do that for everyone.
Well, it's an interesting, like, I find it, you talk about like us having power. I find I don't know if it's just the fitness industry or it's probably all industries, but like the abuse of that power and people, because I think like from the client side or the athlete side, it's like they're always looking for the thing that makes them the best, or how do I achieve my results the quickest? And thus you have a lot of people try this one new trick, or this one new pill is going to get you there. And it's like, if we had developed that, everybody on the planet would have been taking that or been doing that. And I think it's one of those things where you get so much misinformation, and it's one of those gray areas because it's not necessarily misinformation. Like let's take like a pre-workout, for example, one that says, this pre-workout's going to put 5 pounds. Let's make it ridiculous. This pre-workout's going to put 20 pounds on your bench press in the next 3 weeks. Well, let's say that person's a fairly strong athlete to begin with. They just needed a couple technique tweaks and they just need a little more practice. That supplement, we can say almost definitively that it was not the thing that gave that person the result. The thing that gave that person the result was the consistent training, adhering to a program, hitting it day after day, adherence, right? But if that supplement gave them the routine that said, you know what, I take this thing, I do my training, it kept them on point by nature of some idea that, hey, now that I've taken this thing, I have to train. People will start thinking it was the supplement that did it. It wasn't all that other work that I put in. So then they give the credit to the supplement, and then boom, this thing becomes huge. Or everybody starts selling it or wanting to get it. When in reality, it was kind of these underlying facts of just adhering to training. So it's like this weird gray area of like misinformation. That thing didn't do that for you, but you still got the result after you started taking that thing.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and that's the heart of correlation versus causation, and being able to understand the lack of causality between two things that just happen to occur together, and that you need to investigate, is this thing causing this other thing, and what are the other factors that could be also causing it, which makes it seem like these first two are more related than they are. And so that's when, even going back to like the arbiter of knowledge thing, is like the gap for most of the fitness people, especially those who spread the misinformation, is that they don't have the tools from a science perspective to understand the actual scientific information and be able to disseminate it into the general public. They're mostly getting it from second or third hand sources and then disseminating it. So I know, like, Chad, you post on your story sometimes, like, reading this study or reading that study about whatever kind of hypertrophy, strength programming, physical performance, or you've looked at the mass research review, which is awesome. And those types of things sharpen your skills on looking at the actual science and then being able to disseminate that, or being able to pull people back when they identify a relationship and you're like, no, you got to slow down. Like, when you look at the research, the link from a causality standpoint hasn't actually been determined, so we can't necessarily say that doing this is going to cause this. And I feel like that's the big gap. And so I'm actually in the process of putting together kind of a presentation on how to, essentially like a research crash course, like how to identify where to get research, how to read it, how to identify what components are important, and how to then translate that to actual clinical practice or actual like gym practice. And I don't know, it seems like such a lack in.
Oh yeah. Well, there's so much information out there. It's like you said, like I like to read a lot, and I like to read as much valuable information as I can. But all I think it does sometimes is make me question everything, which is good, I think, to an extent, because I think that's where you get such a, as a physical therapist, I don't think there's nearly as broad of a spectrum as far as like knowledgeable to like not very knowledgeable. Whereas like personal trainers, it's like to become a personal trainer, for some gyms, there's absolutely no credentials needed. And it's like, I was listening to a podcast yesterday, and it was a powerlifting podcast, and they were brought up a really good point. Probably the biggest thing that personal trainers probably should at least go into some sort of course involving anatomy, physiology, like how does the body actually work? How do muscles contract and lengthen and shorten and stabilize and this and that? It's like those things. So many trainers have zero background in, so they end up throwing exercises because it's like, oh, that exercise trains the quads. It's like, but why? Why does it train the quads? How does it train the quads? So it's just it can be interesting, and I don't know if it's just the individual coaches and trainers don't want to take the time to learn, or they think that they've got it all figured out, that there is no more information. I think there was a time in my training career that it's like I think I started to assume that I got it figured out, like, oh, I finally wrapped my head around it. Last like 3 years when me and Logan started this business, the biggest epiphany I think we both experienced is that we know nothing. And there's an endless amount of information that can still be gathered, which is cool though. It's like, okay, so this journey doesn't just stop here. It goes on for forever. We're always gonna be learning and gathering. And I think Greg Knuckles posted something about proper determining like rep ranges for certain muscle like growth and development. He's like, he's basically putting out there that he doesn't think that there's any set range at all and this and that. It's like, there's so much information, and it's like you got to formulate your own thoughts. You got to come up with your own conclusions. People are very quick to make assumptions, and they'll watch these YouTube videos, they'll watch a post, and I do it too. And everybody out there that's in the fitness world does it to some extent. They do something that it's like, it's eye catching. Stop doing this exercise immediately. It's the worst thing for your knee. And it's like, maybe, depending on how you phrase it and how you perform that exercise. But someone shot me a video yesterday of Squat University. They posted a video about how to stretch the pec minor and how most people do it: elbow at 90 degrees, push it against the rig, and then just kind of stretch and manipulate this area here. He's like, if you're doing that and you feel the tension in the shoulder, it's probably not a good thing. So someone sent me that, and they only watched it up until that part. And they're like, oh, you have me do this stretch all the time. Well, what do you think of what he's got to say? It's like, did you watch the whole video? If you watch until the very end, he goes back to that original exercise and explains how to do it properly. And it's like, okay, you made an assumption. You only watched the first 10 seconds, immediately made whatever accusations in your head, like, oh, I got to see what Chad has to say about this. It's like, watch the whole fucking video first. Like, get all the information. And I talked to that person. I explained to him, like, hey, did you watch the whole video? If you watch the whole video, he'll explain why. But, him, all these other, I would say reputable IG people, influencers, whatever. It's like they want views. They want likes. They may have all the right intentions. They want to provide good information. That's great. But they're still going to use the same tricks that a lot of people that don't know anything are going to use. Shocking. If you do this stretch, it's going to add, 20 pounds to your deadlift. It's like, oh, maybe, right. I get frustrated with that stuff, but it's like in a weird twisted way. It's like, we all kind of play that game some.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, Squat University is probably the most like controversial person you can bring up. There's a lot of problems with a lot of the stuff that he says. And a lot of it unfortunately is kind of based on like that fear mongering, right? Where it's, hey, if you do this thing, then this horrible thing is going to happen. And it's kind of one of those things where you can get into a position where you're noceboing yourself. It's like, I'm squatting with my knees forward over my toes. I've never had knee pain. I've done it progressively, and I'm doing it okay. And I've gotten progressively stronger over time with no discomfort. And then someone walks along and they're like, dude, your knees come really far forward. Have you not ever had knee pain? And then the person's like, no, I haven't. He's like, pooh, man. He's like, I squatted like that and I developed knee pain so quickly. He was like, it's coming. Don't worry. You're going to get some knee pain. And now the person's like, fuck, am I going to get knee pain? And the next time they go squat, they find like,
plant that seed.
Yeah. They're like, I do kind of have knee pain. And, so you can, as much as you can get a placebo effect from certain things, you can get a nocebo effect from certain things as well. And that would be that kind of expectation driving your experience. And so a lot of what Squat University bases the traction on is that kind of nocebo language where you'll say, you know, deadlifting with a rounded back will guaranteed lead to disc herniations in the future, because based on how the spine is built, it's not a load bearing joint like your hip, which is a ball and socket. So therefore, it must not be able to handle those loads in a flex position. And it's like, okay, well, now everyone who sees a rounded back in their deadlift video is going to be overly concerned that that's going to cause injury, when the reality is like there's just no legitimate evidence that you can cite that supports that claim or that idea. So um, the social media is just, it's the worst place for discussing these types of ideas that are so nuanced, but at the same time, like, how else are you going to popularize or just get the information out there today, you know, in 2020? Like, if you're a physical therapist, you want to do some good, you want to reach a bigger audience, you want to help more people, like, you want to use social media. But there's almost nothing that I can say in a minute, because I'm not getting into the nuance of things, that can't be in some capacity questioned or refuted, because I legitimately did not answer all the questions, and I did not address all the possible things that you could say to refute what I'm saying, because I only spoke for a minute. And it's just such a difficult platform. And a lot of times I'll see even folks like Squat University post something where I'm like, that's a little limited in the thinking there. But if we had a legitimate argument, I think that this person could probably support their argument in a way that I would concede on 95% of their points and accept most of their premise. And so I'm not like mad at them because they posted this thing, but other folks will comment on it and be like, this is totally wrong for this reason. And it's like, well, I just didn't address all of the possible counter arguments because it's a small Instagram clip. I know that those counter arguments exist and I have the capacity to address them. I just can't do that in every single post. So it's just a weird platform to discuss science. And I feel like left alone without being in combination with like well-written blog posts or podcasts that are long form where you can really dive into ideas, or some other form or medium where you can dive into the nuance, social media alone is just going to, it seems like it just makes folks progressively more divisive, especially in the PT world, at least.
Well, I mean, it's divisive, I think, is the thing, because it's like, it seems to me, like you said, you get on Instagram in particular, you get like a minute, right, to discuss, and they have like IGTV or whatever, but it's this mentality of like, in 30 seconds or less, I better get that information, otherwise I'm going to keep scrolling. And so I think one of the things that's a byproduct of that is you do have legitimate resources wanting to, hey, I'm here, come follow me in my other long format things. But it's a real shotgun technique as far as the viewer goes. So they'll be scrolling through and be getting a billion and one different kind of views, and then trying to kind of lock down the one that's correct is it's a task in and of itself. But like, just to kind of bring it back around as well, then, you know, people will find one piece of information and then latch onto it and say like, okay, that's the thing. And then 100%, and then it works for them, right? They'll latch onto it and they'll go do it or whatever it is, and it works for them. Either they feel better or they move better or they lift more, and then that becomes the thing for them. And everybody else should be doing it, and if it's not done that way, then they're wrong. And granted, it worked for you, it may not work for everybody. But, and I was talking with one of my members, this was probably a couple weeks back, but um, asking kind of my thoughts on a particular training method. And I'm like, what do I care what the training method is? Are you adding weight to the bar? Yes. Are you able to do more repetitions? Yes. Do you feel better? Are you moving fine? Are you in pain? No. Yeah, no. Then it's working. What does it matter what the name applied to that training methodology is? Or what's it matter that you're doing it a way different than you used to? At the end of the day, there's really only two things you have to worry about, and is it, are you getting stronger and are you staying healthy? Like, there's, you I think we want to get so specific, and then we want to pick a side, and then social media only kind of flames that. And I mean, to my knowledge, there's not one training methodology that's superior, right? Like,
right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like one of the members yesterday, he brought up this, I think it's Mike Israetel's, one of his programs, and it's like a 6-day-a-week split. He's like, what do you think of this program? I glance at it, and I'm like, it's cool, man. Like, Mike Israetel, he's reputable, he's a smart guy. He's,
shout out,
I'm
love
sure,
that dude.
yeah, I'm sure it's going to be super effective. I told him that I like Mike Israetel because he's pretty much a straight shooter. He just says what he believes, and he doesn't sugarcoat things. But he was like, what do you think of the split? And I asked him, I was like, well, how many days are you training now? And he's like, on a good week, like 3. And I'm like, okay, you just showed me a 6-day week program. I'm like, well, maybe that's not the one for you. That's my only 2 cents. I could care less, like, what the exercise selection. He was concerned with, like, I think Mike had multiple days with front delt exercises. So either bench press or shoulder specific or whatever. And he was like, is that going to be too much for my shoulders? I'm like, I don't even know if that's a worry, because you're not going to make that program. Right. You're not going to be consistently doing 6 days. I couldn't do 6 days. I'm doing 5, and I struggle to get 5 sometimes. Like, there's many weeks where I'm just like, all right, 4 was plenty. This is crap, you know? Yeah. But yeah, it's people want to be obsessed with the nuances. Oh, is this exercise selection? Is this perfect for me? Or is this rep range? Does Mike Israetel know something that the rest of the world doesn't? Because he wrote 12 for bent over rows where Lane Norton wrote 10. And it's like, oh, he must know something different about that rep range that's more important. It's like, no, dude, it doesn't matter at all. Like, can you stick to the program for long enough for it to work? That's probably your biggest question anyway. And yeah, like Logan said, like, are you getting hurt? Does it put you in a position where you can't recover? Because that would be the other side of the coin, is like, are you even able to play catch up from such a high volume training routine? Like, it's just a lot of work to get done. Yeah. And unless you live in the gym, you eat, sleep, and breathe training, it probably won't work long term. Maybe a week or 2, but yeah.
I think the answer is generally, are you able to recover from it? You know, whatever it is that you're doing, it's like, sure, you can do it, that's fine, you know? Yeah. But if you're not able to recover from it, then you can't continue.
Like, I can take a bullet once. You know?
Yeah, you know, a couple of them, I don't know about that. You know?
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like for most people along those same lines, like, all right, we have a minimum effective dose. This is how much training you need to get any adaptation whatsoever. You have your maximal recoverable volume, which is the most amount that you're able to recover from, which you do not want to exceed for extended periods of time. If the program puts you somewhere in the middle of those 2 and you enjoy it, done. I don't give a shit.
That's easy. Yeah.
You're done. Like,
don't worry about anything else.
Yeah. You brought up the other thing. Make it fun. It has to be fun. It has to be exciting. You have to enjoy the workout for sure.
Because you'll adhere to it, and that's the answer.
Right. And that's like, it changes a little different. Like, for some people, what's fun is getting their absolute best squat in the meet. And then I'm like, okay, we can't just hang out anywhere between minimum effective dose and maximal recoverable volume. We need to be a little bit more diligent in kind of progressing through and maybe above overreaching, come back down, deload, and progress from there. Maybe we need to be a little more precise with the programming. But for most folks, even for myself included, as time goes on, I'm like, I think I mentioned this in one of the other episodes, quote unquote, but Chris Jones from Physiques of Greatness, like back in the day.
Yeah, that's an old one.
You remember?
Blast from the past. Yeah.
It's probably 2013 that I was watching his video, and he was arguing in favor of bodybuilding, like body part splits, against the argument that, oh, well, it'd be more effective if you did a higher frequency just because you're recovering, but now you're wasting several days between the time you kind of reintroduce a stimulus that causes protein synthesis to occur. So anyways, he was arguing against it, and he's like, look, my genetic limit is a certain amount of muscle and strength that realistically I'm going to approach at some point in my lifting career, because I'm not gonna use exogenous hormones and testosterone. So there's a natural limit that I'm gonna hit, and I almost prefer to hit it in 10 years than 5 years, because if I make progress too fast, then I'm going to like max it out, you know? And he's almost like, I'm okay with being patient and taking my time because I enjoy making progress so much that I almost rather make slower progress over a longer period of time than making excessively quick progress in a short period of time. And I always thought that was interesting because appreciating just a slow progression over time where you're able to be maybe a little more flexible or have a little bit more fun with your programming, to me has become something that I value so much more than like I need to be on the program that is the most optimal for developing these physical qualities as possible. Um,
I
and
think
so, yeah, go ahead.
I think it's like we say it all the time, right? It's enjoy and trust the process. And I think, whether even you take a certain amount of time and you go, or a window of time in your training career, if you go short or if you go long, again, it's just that fundamental that matters is that you were doing something along the way. But I do want to ask, like, because I think we talked about like having fun and adhering to the training, right? That there's a group of people that think, and we'll kind of take two ends here, and I can almost guarantee you the answer is going to lie somewhere in the center, but like on this end, you have a lot of variety. Not doing the same thing every single day in their training is what's fun, and they do it. And then on the other end, it's like, okay, we have to do this is the thing that works, stick to it, and never change. And I think on both ends, you probably see some plateau at some point. And if you don't have some sort of variety, then you're just going to be capped out at that current strength level. And thus the answer being somewhere in the center of you're going to need some sort of variation from what it is you're presently doing. And I think having that open mindset to do that is probably more beneficial than saying, okay, that's the one thing that worked and that's the one thing I'm going to do the rest of my life. But do either of y'all know, is there any sort of like data on is more variety better than less variety?
Better for what?
Great question. Let's take it in the mindset of strength and conditioning. So
So
making,
improved performance or like avoiding like injury? Because I think Max, you've touched on
I think,
this where it's like more variety tends to have a lower risk of injury, more because you're not beating down these same movement patterns over and over. And chances are, if you're doing the same lifts, your goal is to get better at that lift. I would guess like a power lifter was susceptible to injury because we squat, bench, and deadlift 6 times a week. You know, like it's overdone. So like that, like or just like as far as like performance, like increasing muscle size versus muscle strength, conditioning.
Yeah. So variation as an introduction to the conversation. There's different types of variation, right? You can vary in exercise selection. You can vary in training frequency from one week to the next. You could have a variation in training that actually doesn't change volume, intensity, or frequency. So if you have the same 5-day program and right now it's kind of like a push pull legs upper lower, you could just switch that 5 days, literally take the exercises, plug them around, and just have 5 full body days. And you just reorganize all the exercise in there to make it a 5 full body. And the volume, frequency, intensity, nothing changed. Literally nothing other than the organization of the same exercises within the week. And so that's an example of variation. So I feel like there are different reasons to vary training in different ways. But I still think like when you think of, okay, is more variation better for performance? I think that you have to identify what the performance is and how you're going to vary it. So Chad touched on like injury risk. In general, folks who train specifically for a certain sport or performance, increased variation decreases their risk of injury simply because they are being less specific. They're probably allowing their body to tolerate a greater general load because that load is distributed in different ways across the joints differently. And so they're better able to tolerate that. And you're not overloading one pattern one way. And so you're not getting these kind of overuse injuries from exceeding your tolerance. But when you look at it from the performance standpoint, for example, a bodybuilder who's exclusively looking to increase muscle size, they probably would get almost no kickback or no decrease in performance, and performance for them is going to be maximizing hypertrophy if they go from each week, this week they split squat, next week they lunge, next week they regular squat, next week they do step ups. As long as they're loading it with the same RPE, same number of sets that are difficult, they're probably going to have no difference in their performance, because each movement will equally tax the physical quality that they're looking to develop, which would be muscle hypertrophy. Then in the context of like a power lifter, which obviously you guys know, the strength comes from multiple different components. So there can be a technical component, there's a neural adaptation, and then there is the hypertrophy. Probably variation in exercise selection is going to have almost no difference on the hypertrophy component. But now if your performance is contingent on you being proficient at a specific movement, like in powerlifting, squat, bench, or deadlift, well, if your variation inhibits your ability to adequately accumulate the practice of the technique that you need in order to develop proficiency at that skill, then that variation is going to decrease performance, right? And if an excessive variation limits your ability to accumulate load over time and subsequently create the neural adaptations that allow your body to tolerate heavier weights, then an increased variation is decreasing performance. But if you're in a circumstance in which you are injured and the injury is inhibiting your ability to accomplish the technique and the heavy loading of that specific movement, in that case, potentially variation allows you to create a training effect while mitigating some of that discomfort. But I almost feel like in most circumstances, more variation is probably going to negatively affect performance. But you always have to ask yourself, based on the phase of training I'm in, do I need to be able to perform perfectly? Like if I'm 6 months out of a meet, my squat, bench, and deadlift performance isn't actually that important right now. The actual performance of my sport, 1 rep max, squat, bench, and deadlift. Right now, what's important is that I develop general physical preparedness, increase my hypertrophy, and as I get closer to the meet, I'll be more specific to maximize my performance. So even in the case that performance is the goal at some point, that doesn't mean you need to maximize performance right now if you're far away from that need. And thus variation can help you develop the other physical qualities that will set you up to maximize the more specific training that comes down the road. And that's that concept of like phase potentiation, right? One phase will develop qualities that the next phase will then benefit from having. Those phases are always going to approach decreased variation as you approach the data you need to perform something. But further out, variation is going to help you. It's just hindering your performance in the short term, right? What do you guys think about that?
It's, I think the answer is always define what it is you want to do. And if it's like you have a competition or event at a certain date, then things will probably get a little more important to whatever that event is the closer you get to it. Or if it's kind of a general health and well-being and there's no real date set, then this stuff will matter a little bit less. But right. At the end of the day, it's like we have to always kind of consider, are we developing a skill set? Are you developing something that through practice and repetition, that's the only way you'll get better at it? Or is it, hey, I just need to get my heart rate up for a little while and exercise and then be better at the end of that, right? So
Right.
it's again kind of just defining what it is you want to have done, and then remember that whenever the variation happens, a variation will probably be beneficial to whatever component you want to train. It'll pay off either in the long run, immediately, or you're doing it now for a particular reason in the future.
Right. So my question for both of you is how do you how do you guys approach programming for people whose goals are, I'll give you a specific example, but how do you approach programming for people whose goals compete against each other from a like developmental standpoint? So my idea would be someone who wants to improve their cardiovascular endurance. Say they're an MMA fighter, or they like to run 10Ks, or they're maybe a CrossFitter or along that lines, but they also don't have a sufficient base of strength and they want to increase that at the same time. And we know that there might be some negative impact of one training on the other. How do you guys approach programming that?
I think something I kind of wanted to bring up before, but this actually kind of answers that question. At least for me, is I ask myself like, what stage is this athlete? So if I have someone that is completely new to everything you just mentioned, their conditioning, their strength, like they haven't been down that road. Chances of them being able to handle more variation, more variety in their training and not have it hinder any of their other performance factors is probably okay. If I have someone who has never done strength training in his life, well, their strength is going to be relatively low versus like their conditioning. Same thing. They're probably not going to have great conditioning. So when they lift and whatever conditioning exercise I give them, whether it's running or rowing, they're not going to cover a whole lot of distance. They're not going to move a whole lot of weight. So chance of it interfering with any issue on any spectrum, I think, is smaller. But as they continue to advance and progress, those factors become more and more important. And then we start to delegate, like, okay, do we need days where we're going to specifically focus on our strength training? How often are we visiting certain lifts? Maybe their goals will change as they go through. But I think for a lot of the athletes, we get so many athletes that come through that I want to gain muscle, I want to get bigger, but I also want to cut a whole bunch of body fat. I want to be ripped now. And it's like, well, you haven't spent any time building muscle. So my first recommendation is to build muscle. However, if you have someone that comes in and they're 60, 70 pounds overweight, it's like, okay, you totally could lose 20 or 30 pounds, and that's not going to hinder your ability to gain muscle. You're going to be fine. Like, you're in that, I say it's a sweet spot, even though they're completely new and they haven't done anything yet, but it's like you're in this great position where it's just like, we could do all of it right now. As you get better at this, as you lose body fat, it'll get harder to lose body fat. As you gain muscle, it's going to get harder to build muscle. As your conditioning grows, it's going to get harder to get better at covering distance with a lower resting heart rate. Like, it's all these things become more difficult and harder to manage. So I think when the athletes come in, I try to learn as much about that individual in as short amount of time as we can. Me and Logan do first week assessments, followed by, like you said, we do block training. Each phase builds on the previous block. The first couple phases, it's broad, it's vast. We just put squat. Is it going to be with a barbell, a kettlebell, a body weight? It doesn't matter really. They just need to learn how to squat properly. If they do it great with a body weight, cool. Let's move up to a kettlebell. Still, form is still pretty sound. They still understand what the concepts that we're trying to communicate. Boom, let's go to the barbell. Barbell's still working, cool. Let's load some weight on the bar. As they get more advanced, I think I'm more willing to dictate little nuanced factors that we've been talking about, that it's like, these don't matter that much. They do when you get much more advanced, but that time frame is like, for most of our athletes, is like, we've got some time. We don't need to stress about, is this program perfect for you? If it covers muscle groups properly, the frequency as well, the volume as well, you're recovering well, don't sweat the small stuff. But yeah, I think I like to take into account, like, who is this person, what stage of training they are. We've got a lot of really advanced athletes. It's great. We've got a lot of beginners and we've got a lot of intermediate. So each group, we try our best to specifically train for specific actions and growth, and more variation for some of those new people. When you're new, it's like coordination's huge, cognitive ability. Like we're trying to teach them how motor skills work, how to move their body, how to, I mean, this was years ago. I remember having an athlete, and I kept on trying to teach him how to do a bicep curl, no matter how many times. I demonstrated, I said it. I was trying to come with different ways to say, close the space between your hand and your shoulder. Every time the elbow would raise, they didn't just doing a front raise and or swinging it. I mean, but for someone like that, it's like, you don't even need variation. You just need, like, we need to keep this so simple, because almost everything I'm saying, I think, is making it overly complicated. When you get new athletes, it's like, I think, especially in powerlifting, technical cues are like everybody's favorite word. And I'll see people like, I missed my lift because I forgot one of my cues. It's like, no, you missed your lift because you weren't strong enough. And like the fact that if you had to think about a cue while you're like maxing out, you're not ready. You have not applied that cue. You have not learned how to actually make that happen autonomous. Like, it needs to just be muscle memory at this point. But everybody wants to throw, hey, you need to know this as soon as we get a new person. And it can, at TriFit, I think we do a pretty good job, but we get some of the veteran athletes that are very excited to see new people. Oh, this person, I need to go tell them because I noticed they weren't doing something that Chad told me or Logan told me forever ago. I got to go tell them right now. It's like, no, they don't need to know that yet, because you're going to just make things way harder for them. They're in a new environment. They've got enough stimulus. When does stimulus become an issue? And I think a lot of it is stage and progression. Like, what stage are they at? If they're new, they may not be able to handle all these different like nuances. It's like, keep it simple. Bend at the knees, keep your feet flat, keep your chest up. That's it. I'm not saying anything else about squatting today. But
let's like talking about how to train people with conflicting kind of goals, whether it be like, hey, I want to be able to run farther, but I also want to produce a heavier 1 rep max, or like I want to gain muscle and lose weight at the same time. I think Chad nailed just it really is super dependent upon the person. If I generally like to manage expectations and say, hey, well, if we do these things, they're kind of conflicting. Do you have one that's more important to you than the other? And they'll kind of say, well, okay, well then for me, it's like, again, let's break it down into phases a little bit. Let's focus on this one thing during this phase, and then we'll focus on this one thing. And I take a very Ron Swanson approach. You never half-ass two things, whole-ass one thing. So kind of focus on that that progress first and foremost, and then I think you can get there a little bit better than if you were to try and do everything under the sun.
So you really delineate between like your aerobic capacity block. Like, so Chad, you kind of alluded to, okay, within a week, we might differentiate. One training session is going to be a focus on the aerobic component, the other training session is whatever. Within the week, Logan, are you within, say, a 4-week block? Are you saying this entire 4-week block is going to be like, what percentage dedicated towards, like, try to get into a little bit more of the actual logistics of general numbers type of thing?
Yeah. So I am a big fan of like, hey, let's just, whatever we have the 4-week block, let's stick to this 4-week block. If you say the client comes to me and 2 weeks in is like, dude, I hate this movement and I never want to do it again, I'm going to say, great, let's get rid of it. Because again, if you like do it, well, are we doing it for a specific reason? Is it because this is here because of your goal, or is it just because I don't see the, you don't see the purpose in it and I hate doing it? And I'm like, cool. I mean, there's a million and one different variations we can do. So I will change it out if it keeps you happy in doing it, right? Adherence is always the fundamental. But I would say something like, let's say like somebody wants to get stronger. Maybe not in a 1 rep max sense, but maybe in like a, hey, I want to move more load over maybe a 3, 4, or 5 rep maximum. But I also, I need to have a good mile or a good 5K for, the military or whatever. I mean, I would say probably 70-ish% of the training is going to go into actual lifts, where I would leave that maybe 30-ish% for some sort of cardiovascular work. I think it's a little bit easier to maintain endurance than it is strength, as far as um, I think more of the strength training and how we structure that um, will have more carryover to your entire capacity than the other way around. That cardio, that long endurance stuff isn't going to have much carryover to the actual strength training itself. And again, that's all kind of broken down dependent upon the person, but I'd say that's the template in my mind with which is going to drive the next block of training, and so on and so forth.
And then what would the next block of training? So you may focus 70% on strength training. The
Mm-hmm.
person gets to the end of the 4 weeks. And this was going to be my other question. Like, are you guys in your initial assessments? Obviously, at some point with someone, you're going to assess what is a squat, push, pull type of 1 rep max or rep max of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
Are you doing an assessment of aerobic capacity, like max meters of, on the assault bike, to assess progress objectively on that sense? And then B, if the person gets to the end of the 4 week block and they're like, okay, so I feel like I've been doing a lot of lifting, but I still don't feel like I'm getting much progress because we've been focusing so much on lifting. I feel like I'm not getting as much out of my aerobic stuff. Do you shoot to continue the strength training until you feel like, okay, we've gotten a good base of strength over 12 weeks? Or would you switch from that 4 week block now to a 4 week block where you're focused more on aerobic capacity? Like, what are the time frames on these periodization schemes that you're looking at?
So I generally look to that 8-week totality. At the end of the 8 weeks, pretty much one of two things is going to happen. The goal from the athlete's going to change, or we will look towards some capacity of a test. And as far as the cardiovascular goes, mainly the metric for me is either distance or time, kind of just depending on what they want to do. And if we look at the numbers, while they don't, maybe some fatigue is accumulating as we get towards that kind of 5th and 6th week, and it's going to be kind of warranting either a taper and then a test, or a deload. But I generally still see, at least, that distances are going up and times are coming down still. If they said, hey, my cardio is just not where I want it to be, I'll probably say, let's give it another 4 week block, and then we'll absolutely change, because we're doing so good on the strength. Let's at least have some sort of metric for whether we've really increased the strength capacity in the way you want. And if it's maybe a little bit more of a seasoned athlete and they're really looking just to move that 1 rep maximum, we'll maybe take a week to taper and then test for a 1 rep maximum. Or if it's somebody who's like maybe leaning a little more endurance, or their strength is, I just want to be able to move more weight over more repetitions, then we'll look at as many repetitions as possible, an AMRAP set come that last week. And then make sure that they know, like, hey, look at your 7th and 8th week numbers. We only scheduled you to do 7s, 6s, 5s, whatever, at a 9, 10 RPE, but for your as many reps as possible set, you blew it out of the water. You took it for 15, you took it for 20. So there's a lot of capacity there to improve upon, and there's a lot of strength that you gained from those previous weeks. So I think just to kind of like hammer it out is, for me at least, it's kind of that 8-week block. We're assessing as we go through, and then we have some culmination on a test kind of in that 8th-ish, 9th-ish week. And then it's meet with the athlete again, see how the goals changed, go from there.
Yeah, it's like, with strength, or most of the athletes in here, I probably don't have them spend anything less than like 50% of their workout doing some sort of strength lift, something specific to increasing stability, core bracing, proper joint action. Like they're very much in control of that weight. And it's with a load that is progressively getting harder each week. So they get more challenged, they're building strength and stability. So even if I have athletes in here that's like, my number one goal is to run a marathon, great. you're still doing 50% strength for me. The other 50% will be going towards, increasing that running time, increasing your cardiovascular endurance. It's like, but strength training by itself, and as we all know, it's like strength isn't just this separate category than hypertrophy. Hypertrophy isn't a separate category from conditioning. They all cross over in so many sections. So for some of these athletes that come in, it's just like, I feel like I just can't catch my breath. I walk up the stairs and I feel like I'm dying. I'm like, okay, like I hear you. I understand. I understand that you want to improve that. Go through my training, even though I'm not saying, hey, you need to go run up and down stairs for 30 minutes. Within a few weeks of doing slightly higher rep squatting, bench pressing, deadlifting, rowing, sled work, everything we have in here, if they're moving, their endurance is going to come up with it. Their body's ability to take in oxygen, to recover well, to catch their breath is only going to improve because they're exercising. If I have an athlete who's going through, some of my strength athletes, I'll have them do anywhere between, and now these ones are specifically for like powerlifting. It's like, okay, I want you for at least like,
Uh-oh.
No, I'm back. You guys see me? Oops.
Yeah, we got you.
It's like, I want you at least training certain waves. First wave, we're focusing on fundamentals. I'm a big fan of taking away power lifting belts for a lot of my lifters for 4 weeks. It gives me a way to deload them a little bit, to work on little nuance factors. These are people that are, very specific in their goal. I want to get stronger. So no belt, intro, very high rep, very low loads, and just working on, that's going to build up their endurance. That's going to focus on some of their technique. And then as the training goes on, we were introduced like belt, knee sleeves, the weight goes up, the repetition comes down. But for some of these athletes that it's like, okay, you're only getting in like 2 or 3 exercises because they're just sub maximal. We really don't want to be doing too much more than that. We want to make sure you're recovering. You can totally go get on a bike or a treadmill and walk for 20 to 30 minutes because that's not going to limit your ability to get stronger, and it should keep your ability to catch your breath relatively high or moderate. You're not going to go run a marathon just walking on a treadmill, but there's no reason why you can't do cardio and strength training at the same time, as long as you're not trying to do 10-yard sprints and then coming in and trying to work with 3 sets of 6 at 80% of your 1 rep max back squat. Like those 2 things are going to conflict for sure. But do you want to go walk at the park for 30 minutes after your strength training so that you burn some extra calories, you get out, you move? Absolutely, do it, man. Just like, but don't let it inhibit whatever the number 1 goal is. Like Logan mentioned, he said, more times than not, that person's got 1 goal that just sneaks out the other one, just a little bit. I try to encourage people to make strength or building muscle that number 1 goal, just because we know that it's like the stronger they get, the less susceptible to injury, the more stable. When they run, their gait will be more proper. They'll be able to lift their knee and track and handle the impact better. Or if they build muscle, their metabolic rate will increase more so that they'll be able to, hopefully shed more body fat, maintain a leaner body mass to some extent. I try to make strength and building muscle the number 1 priority, 50% of their time. And then the rest of it is up to them. Hey, this block, do you want to focus on some conditioning? Sure. Or I have one girl that she loves CrossFit. She used to do CrossFit all the time. Well, I'm trying to show her just different strength training strategies where we can focus on our weightlifting. We can focus on our powerlifting. There are separate days. Then once a week, it's like, hey, go do a WOD. Go have fun. Keep it under 30 minutes. Keep it moderate. Like don't put heavy hang cleans in that WOD. There's no reason why you can't do that once a week and still keep up some conditioning. Are you going to be a marathon runner? Are you going to go to the Olympics? No. Like that's not a thing, but very few people in here are like, hey, I want to be the absolute top in this field. When people say things like that, it's like, okay, then that's your number 1 goal. You don't have other goals past that point. Then that's what we're going to do. We're going to make sacrifices. We're going to dictate all of your training to making that specific goal possible.
And I want to kind of touch again on like, I think it's important for make sure people understand that it's not, if 8 to 12 weeks, you're not going to lose everything you did in a prior block, right? Like let's say at the end of the 8 weeks, we do our test, and then they really want to focus on their strength test in whatever capacity that is, and then they really want to focus on their cardio capacity. Perfect. We'll go and we'll focus on that for the next 8 weeks. But it's not like by doing that you're going to lose everything you built, particularly in strength. It takes a long time to lose your strength. You might need just some getting used to it again, but your strength will still be there when we come back to it. And like even CrossFitters or strength athletes, again, the important thing at the end of the day, like we've been hammering through this talk, has been just adhering to, sticking with it, and continually doing it. I think the flexibility to focus on one thing at any moment in time will make you a more complete athlete at the end of the day than saying, okay, I'm doing this one thing for the rest of my life. Your body will be healthier by some sort of variation or some sort of goal change at a moment in time. I know, like
Right.
for you, Max, after your knee surgery, man, it was one of those things like, okay, let's focus a little bit more on lightening up the loads and working through the rehab. And then now you're getting into MMA a little bit more, and then Olympic lifting. And it's like, I can almost guarantee you're probably, you can maybe rebuke this, but you're probably one of your strongest individuals right now. And maybe not from like a 1 rep max standpoint, but from the capacity of your knowledge, your ability to be prepared for exercise, your flexibility, your mobility, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think like strength is a bit of a strange word because depending on the crowd who you use it with, they have a
Absolutely.
totally
It's very true.
and radically different conception about what strength means. So you ask a bunch of power lifters and they're like, well, I obviously assume you're talking about 1 rep max squat, bench, and deadlift. And you ask a calisthenics guy and they might talk about like certain poses that they can do while hanging from a bar, and that is their strength. Or you might ask an Olympic weightlifter, obviously they're going to say their weightlifting movements. And you might ask a yoga practitioner and they're going to again talk about positions that they can be in while they can still maintain proper form, proper position. So strength is going to be so different depending on who you ask. And you could even probably use the word strength in replacement of like resilience, right? You could say like this is like a almost like a farmer's strength type of thing where it's like
Yeah.
this person is resilient to load, they're resilient to stresses on their body. To me, that kind of is strength, you know. And so at this point, like when I was very specific to powerlifting, so very specific to strength in a squat, bench, deadlift standpoint, I felt like if I ever tried to chase after a dollar bill that slipped out of my hand, that my quad was 100% off the bone. You know, like that, or my hamstring was 100% going to be pulled from my pelvis, and I was just going to have blood rushing into my
Oh,
my
yeah.
limb. Basically, that's like what my expectation was for any movement that wasn't squat, bench, deadlift. And so you could argue like that's not a very strong body that you've built because it's not resilient to stresses. Whereas now I feel like, I mean, I'm always going through my aches and tweaks or whatever, just like anyone else who tries to push themselves on a regular basis. But I feel like from a global kind of higher variability standpoint, I can handle stressors from any angle in a more cohesive way than I could when I was so specific to one kind of element of strength or physical preparedness. So, yeah, I mean, I definitely, it's been an interesting thing for me trying to work towards being a little bit better, like aerobic capacity wise, but trying to figure out how am I going to approach this from a programming standpoint. Um, Being that like I do have other strength goals in mind, but again, I think it comes back to a lot of what you guys said. Like, do you at a minimum, are you hitting kind of the minimum effective dose for your training from a strength standpoint? And then can you fill in the extra time with other stuff that's specific to these other goals? And Logan, I like the idea of just obviously just let's see what happens in 8 weeks and then reassess with some kind of objective measure. And you might find that your minimum effective dose for endurance training as someone who's generally not well conditioned, that might be 1 day a week of pushing the sled and doing kettlebell swings. And you might see a 15% improvement in your assault bike time for a 500 meter or whatever the metric is. So I feel like I am at fault for this in certain circumstances as well, where I have an image in my head that I'm like, if I want to improve at this physical quality, I feel like I need to dedicate this much of my training to it. When in reality, like, I haven't tried to retest and test my 200-meter row time, do a 4-week block where I'm only rowing once or twice a week, and then retest and see like how much improvement am I getting off just once or twice a week. In my head, I'm like, I got to be doing this at least 3 or 4 times a week to make progress. When in reality, for something super underdeveloped like that, I probably don't need that much of a stimulus to make improvement. So I like the idea of just starting here, retest, and then including some degree of freedom from just an adherence standpoint to do things that I just kind of generally enjoy. But there was another thing that one of you brought up that I wanted to ask, and this is in line with deloads. So, do you guys always intentionally program deloads? Are they necessary? Can you just train below your maximum recoverable volume forever and never need to deload? And how do you guys approach that?
Are they necessary? I think that's a really, really good question. So I'm a little bit more, particularly with our athletes and our members, like I'm a little more just talking with them, kind of feeling out where our PE lies. It's like, I have one of my members this past week has just been absolute garbage and everything feels like hell. And I'm like, all right, we're deloading next week, but he's been absolutely killing the training and throwing on weight. And it's like, we have to, at some point, um, hit a wall, you know what I mean? Do I intentionally program them? I don't, I used to. I don't think I do that anymore. I think I'm a little bit more like, let me listen to the athlete a little bit more. Let me see if we're still making progress. Who am I to stop it? Why would I stop it just to deload it if the gains are still being made? So I know myself, I kind of struggle in between. Um, are they necessary? I think is a really good question, because I don't know if they're necessary. Could you ride that minimum line the whole time? Um, that kind of like you're always getting a minimum effective dose, and then you're able and always to recover from it. I think what I would generally see more often is uh, there's some like burnout effect for the athlete, where it's like, I just can't keep doing this. Let's take a break, right? Let's say in powerlifting, if it's I have to squat, bench, and deadlift, um, then let's take a break from squatting, benching, and deadlifting for a couple of weeks, see how you feel, and then we'll get back into it. And more often than not, what I see is when they get back into it, um, the strength skyrockets. And I don't know if that was because we deloaded, or if it was just this mental break from it all. So I think they happen by nature of people and burnout. But it may also be the case that they happen because somebody needs to deload for maybe a physiological reason.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we do here, and what sometimes I'll put in the program, is I will think about throwing them a deload maybe like every 4 weeks or so, just depending on how well have they been training, like how consistent, how aggressive, were they a beginner, were they already into an intermediate or an advanced range, so they're able to accumulate fatigue and stress at a pretty rapid rate. If you have someone that's already squatting 400 plus and that's his rep ranges, it's like, okay, this dude can get tired quick. He can be sore. He can break down because he can put so much on his shoulders. Then we get like smaller, earlier in development, maybe even like I'll pick on gender, some of the more female athletes who aren't lifting because their percentages are just lower, it's just relative to strength. They're not lifting as much weight as some of the gentlemen. Or let's say we do have a female that's incredibly strong and she is lifting a considerable amount of weight. Then yeah, all of them, I like to almost like check in, like Logan said, like try to build some sort of rapport with the athlete. Hey, how do you feel? Like what's going on? Try to get to know the athlete, because some athletes are not good at admitting that they feel like crap. Some are terrible at telling you that things don't feel good. They, for whatever reason, their pride, they feel like they're going to disappoint you, which I hate. I tell my athletes, I'm like, hey, you can be super honest. It's okay. And then on the flip side, you get some athletes that are very timid. They are quick to jump on the, I think I need to back off already. It's like, are you sure? We've been in this long enough, and it's hard to say there's a certain formula for us to kind of say, hey, if A, B, and C match up, then I know the answer is going to be D. It's like, well, it's like I know by looking at your sheet, looking at the previous blocks, talking to you, watching you lift, if you're breezing through things, and I can see that from your workout blocks, that we're making very small increases in load over time, chance of you getting a deload goes smaller. Like sometimes what I'll do is I will flip it. Yes, I'll bring down the weight, but I'll increase the repetition, so the volume can actually continue to increase, or the volume will at least stay linear. So it's like, okay, we're not backtracking at all, but if you feel like you need a deload, we can do that. But what for some athletes need a devolume. Some athletes need straight up, like Logan said, like I think a mental break week is great for intermediate and advanced athletes. Like those people, we got to keep them mentally focused and driven and into the training. And that can be very difficult depending on how long they've been training, how hard they train, how consistent. Sometimes I make it mandatory. If someone, especially if someone like recently worked up to a competition, tested a 1 rep max, it's like, hey, next week, don't you fucking come to the gym.
You get a deload, you stop.
Or it's just like, if you come to the gym, if I see you touch a straight barbell, you're in trouble. You can go and you can do push-ups. If you're that person that just, I have to go to the gym, fine. But you need to just not touch the bar for a week. Mentally, there is something to be said. And I don't know, I don't have a study or a reference, but I know for certain, being an athlete, I've been playing sports and lifting weights my whole life. If you do too much of anything, eventually you start to resent it. You start to, you need breaks. You need to find quirky ways to keep things fun and progressive. Some of these newer people, I think they need a little more push. Like Logan said, it's like you need to go maybe 8 to 12 weeks before a little deload. Or if they're just like, I just don't feel that good. Okay. All right, maybe, you are just a type of person, your body's ability to recover, because, things that we don't get to learn much about in here, we talk about, but we don't learn a whole lot. Their sleeping habits, some of their eating habits, their outside stress. Some people come in and they wear their emotions on their shoulder. Some people are hollow shells of soldier, like, oh man, I heard you were in a car accident. Yeah, I'm fine. And they go, and it's like, okay, that's cool. So not knowing everything else that goes on in their life, it's like every 4 weeks or so, I just kind of like to just check, like, hey, maybe we need a deload. Who knows, or is life getting to you? I had an athlete that just left. Past few weeks, she's been fine. I plan her out a deload every like 4 or 5 weeks. Today was the day that she needed that deload. We started to deadlift. Shoulders started to collapse very quickly under loads that should be totally manageable from her regular performance that I've kept track of. So it's like, okay, I told her, I was just like, you know what? Our body's telling us what it needs. What it needs is a lot less weight today, a few extra reps for practice. We use this as a good excuse to practice our skill, and the heavy weight will be there when we come back. When I went up to Stronghand Fitness in Hendersonville to see Ian, something he said, and it was like very almost like profound. It's like, you don't have to lift heavy to get stronger. Just like you don't have to run to build conditioning. You don't have to go on an extreme diet to lose weight. You don't have to. There's so many ways to get to our goal, and thinking that you always have to go heavy in the gym if strength is your goal is going to backfire on you. I think a lot of powerlifters, especially like young adolescent, like males, get obsessed with that. Some females too, for sure. I just see it a lot in the guys. Oh, if I bench press 225 once, I'm never going below that number again. It's like, that's not how this works, dude. You know, like if anything, you need to work under that range. You found the ceiling, now work underneath it and build a foundation. But yeah.
Well, that's
Yeah.
and you touched on it, Chad. The deload is one of those things that, like pretty much everything in our fitness arsenal, is just a tool in the tool chest that will more than likely be used at some point. And uh, like you don't have to deload. Like what deload doesn't mean stop working out. We can, like you said, Chad, we could deload volume, but increase intensity, or decrease intensity and increase volume, and that could create kind of the same stimulus, or at least I guess feel that we would want from something like a deload.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. So, I mean, I feel like that falls in line with essentially just using variation to some degree to continue to maybe even create the same exact adaptation that we want, but doing it in a way that places stresses on the body that are slightly different enough to allow those other patterns that you were moving in to just essentially freshen up.
Yeah,
Which I think is
exactly.
a good point. And then I'm kind of with you, Chad. I'm with both of you in terms of not necessarily having them as an intentional plan, because I feel like the concept of a necessary deload. So you'll hear people say sometimes, "Well, if you don't program deloads because you're not training hard enough," but there's an idea there as if training was the only stressor, and as if your maximal recoverable volume was a solid line that was immovable. If that was the case, sure, you could 100% plan a deload that was at the appropriate time based on the appropriate stimulus that you've been introducing. But the reality is that it could be week 2 of your block and you were planning week 4 as the deload, because on week 3 you were going to touch maximal recoverable volume or exceed maximal recoverable volume, and then you wanted week 4 to bring that down and allow for recovery. But week 2 the person's dog dies and they don't
Yeah.
sleep for 4 or 5 nights because they're just devastated, or any other life circumstance happens. They have a new project at work, or they change jobs, or they lost their job, or whatever other circumstance, and that maximal recoverable volume that you had planned your deload off of, well, it's week 2 and they're already over it. And so you better not wait till week 4 to take a deload, because week 3 they're already running on red and they are potentially going to get injured because they're exceeding that for an extended period of time. So yeah, I feel like on the inverse as well, you could plan a block for someone who works nights, and then on week 1 or week 2 they switch from night shift to day shift and they're sleeping so much better and they're eating better. They're able to have consistent meals with their significant other that otherwise they were just eating like gas station food because they were getting off the night shift or whatever. And now their maximal recoverable volume is way high. They get to week 4 and they're like, dude, I feel better than I did week 1. I feel like I'm recovering way better. And on my end, I'm like, why would we dial it back now? There's no indication that you are in a need physiologically, or if they're not reporting any psychological need of like feeling burnt out or feeling run down. So I'm like, why would we stop? And a lot of times I feel like the athlete may even get frustrated because it, to some degree, you want to educate them and whatnot, but another degree, if you are just deloading them because you decided I'm the authority and I decide that you're not doing as much this week, and they feel like that's not the appropriate decision and they're trying to communicate to you, these variables have changed and I don't feel like I need a deload. If you continually say like, well, you need deloads because I program your training to be hard enough to need it, well, you're basically telling that person that you're not listening to them, and you're going to lose that person as soon as you start to decide that your opinion on their training is more important than their own experience with their own training, and yeah, at that point you lost that person. They're not going to trust you anymore because they don't, you've just told them that you're not listening to them. And so I feel like not having the deload almost forces you to be more connected to the athlete, more in tune with where they're at, how their body's feeling, having a better relationship there. And ultimately, you're able to program for them in a way that is more in line with kind of what's going on with them that week and that day and all that stuff. So yeah, I think that that's great.
Absolutely, man. Yeah.
I don't know if you guys had anything else you guys wanted to touch on before we wrap this
So
up.
I wrote this down while we were all talking because Brian, our PT here, he told me he wants to do a video with me asking like how I would define strength. And like when he asked me initially, I was just like, it took me a second. I'm like, there's so many ways I kind of want to approach that answer. But just as we've been talking about this, like I feel like I've summed up in almost like two words. Like I feel like strength is experience and appreciation. And I say experience because like we mentioned, like Max, you're a very strong person because you've had experience in such a wide range of training models. So like almost any option, if I said, hey Max, go deadlift for me, you, even if you haven't been doing heavy deadlifts for a while, because your experience is still there, you're going to have somewhat of the skill. You're going to be able to maintain a decent number for sure. Now, is it going to be anywhere near your 1 rep max from 4 years ago when you were competing all the time? No. But I think there's a level of like, hey, you can maintain this strength because of the experience that you had. And then appreciation is, I think, comes down to the athlete because there's a lot of, I would say, they look strong on paper, but their appreciation for the lifting and the nuance, getting better at the technique, patience isn't there. So if they appreciate the lift, you appreciate squatting, even though you've had both knees, you know, had surgery on both knees, but you still squat. A lot of people would go through surgery and just be like, well, I'm never squatting again. You learn the appreciation for those lifts and how they can better you. And you'll use them only in a fashion that's going to benefit your body, not necessarily debilitate it. Some people get into powerlifting and they freaking burn out within a year, 2 years, because they go so hard. They end up cutting corners, maybe getting PED use, so on and so forth, because they want these huge numbers now. They never gain the appreciation for the list. And their experience probably also kind of reciprocates that. They haven't been around enough. They haven't done enough to learn how important it is to appreciate the lifts for what they are. But yeah, that was just something I wrote down while we were talking. So I was like, I gotta say it.
I like it, man. I like it.
Yeah, that's good. I feel like strength is one of those things where anyone who has has lived it, has coached it, has essentially an equivalently valuable definition of it, as long as it's inclusive of kind of a variety of potential forms. And so I feel like the way that you presented that, both from a physical standpoint and including all of the different variations of strength from an actual execution standpoint, deadlifting a lot of weight or going on a sprint or whatever the physical performance is, but then also including kind of the psychosocial component of like appreciating the lift, the process, being strong of the mind to endure the guaranteed obstacles that come with the physical strength that you want to exude, I feel like is a perfect way to culminate kind of how you want to conceptualize strength just as a concept for a human being to have. So that was good. That was a solid definition.
Ooh, if you've made it this far in the video, comment below what your definition of strength is.
There you go.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah. So boys, it was good talking to you. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, man, always a pleasure. Always fun.
We will need to set aside a time to do this again next week. And,
absolutely.
That's good.
Where can people find you guys on social media and all that?
At TriFit Barbell, TriFit Barbell on all socials, YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook, I would say are our most active socials right now.
You want to give personal, Logan, Chad?
at Logan Krieger, LoganKrieger. I'm not as active as I used to be, so look for Chad.
At Coach Chad, I think it's 07. Is it at Coach Chad 07? So. Yeah, it's my IG handle. I won't friend you on Facebook. That's my family page.
Fair.
But yeah, check me out. Love to talk to you.
Cool. Yeah, and if anyone wants to get in contact with me, you can either email me at max@precisionperformancept.com, or you can hit me up on Instagram. I believe it's at maxlepage.dpt, but yeah, you can find that. Anyway, so it was good talking to you guys, and for anyone listening, get in contact with us if you have any questions or any ideas for future kind of topics of conversation. So see you guys later.
Later.